Reaving is as much a part of the Ironborn culture as the drowned god himself, carrying off plunder, women and children from the seaside towns that mark the coast of the Sunset Sea, a brutal way of life for both the Ironborn and their targets. Some have put forward the idea that it was the sheer lack of resources, specifically wood, that sent the Ironborn down this bloody path. Near all of what the Iron Islands lacked, Reavers could find in abundance in the green lands to the east. Little and less was taken in trade with these people, and much was brought in blood, with the point of a sword or an axe. When the Reavers returned back to the island with their plunder, they would say that they had paid the iron price for it. Those who stayed behind and benefited from their work were said to have paid the gold price, or thus went without. And thus, as Maester Harrick tells us, Reavers and their deeds were held in the highest esteem by singers, small folk and lords alike. Many legends have come down to us through the millennia of the Salt Kings and Reavers who made the Sunset Sea their own. Men as wild and cruel and fearless as any who have ever lived. Thus we hear the likes of Torgon the Terrible, Jarl the Whale, Dagon Drum, the Necromancer, Horgoth of Pike, and his kraken-summoning horn, and Raggett Ralph of Old Wick. Most infamous of all was Balon Blackskin, who fought with his axe in his left hand and a hammer in his right. No weapon made of man could harm him, it was said. Swords glanced off and left no mark, and axes shattered against his skin. Did such men ever truly walk the earth? It's hard to know, since most supposedly lived and died thousands of years before the Ironmen learnt to write, with literacy still remaining a rare trait in the Iron Islands to this day, and those who possessed the skill often mocked as weaklings or feared as sorcerers. So much of what we know of these demigods of the Dawn Age comes to us from the people they plundered and preyed upon, written in the old tongue and in the runes of the first men. The lands the Reavers plundered were densely wooded, but thinly populated in those days, some even so to this day. Then as in now, the Ironborn were reluctant to go too far from the salt waters that sustained them, but they ruled the Sunset Sea from Bear Island in the north and the frozen shores, right down to the Arbor in the summer sea. The feeble fishing boats and trading cogs of the first men, which seldom ventured out of sight of land, were no match for the swift, long ships of the Ironmen, with their great sails and banks of oars, and when battle was joined upon the shore, mighty kings and famous warriors fell before the Reavers, like wheat before a scythe, in such numbers that the men of the Green Lands told each other that the Ironborn were demons risen from some watery hell, protected by fell sorceries and possessed of foul, black weapons that drank the very souls of those they slew. Thus reaving became a way of life for the Ironborn. Whenever autumn waned and winter threatened, the longships would come raiding after food, and so the Iron Islands ate, even in the depths of winter, whilst often as not, the men who had planted, tended and harvested their own crops starved. We do not sow became the boast of the Greyjoys, whose rulers began to style themselves the Lord Reapers of Pike. The truth is, these Reavers brought back more than gold and grain to the Iron Islands. They brought back captives as well, whom would henceforth serve their captors as thralls. Amongst the Ironborn, only reaving and fishing were considered worthy work for a free man. The endless stoop of labour of farms and fields was only suitable for thralls. The same was true for mining, yet those thralls who were set to field work counted themselves as fortunate. Maester Harrick writes, for many and more of them lived to grow old, and were even allowed to marry and have children. Such could not be said of those condemned to work in the mines, those dark, dangerous pits beneath the hills, where the masters were brutal, the air was dank and foul, and life was short. Most of the male captives brought back to the Iron Islands spent the remainder of their lives at hard labour in the fields or mines. Some few, the sons of lords and knights and rich merchants, were ransomed for gold. Thralls who could read, write and do sums served their masters as stewards, tutors and scribes. Stonemasons, cordwainers, coppers, chandlers, carpenters, and other skilled craftsmen were more valuable. Thraldom was also common practice amongst the first men during their long domination over Westeros, further supporting the idea that the Ironborn had descended from the first men. Further, thraldom should not be conflated with chattel slavery as it exists in certain of the free cities and lands further east. Unlike slaves, thralls retain certain important rights. A thrall belongs to his captor and owes him his service and obedience, but he is still a man, not property. Thralls cannot be bought or sold. They may own property, marry as they wish, have children. The children of thralls are born free. Any babe born on one of the Iron Islands is considered Ironborn, even when both of his parents are thralls. Nor will such children be taken from their parents until the age of 7, when most begin apprenticeships or join a ship's crew. Most of all, it was the young women that the Reavers prized the most. Older women were sometimes carried off by those captains in need of scullions, cooks, seamstresses, weavers, midwives, and that like. But fair maidens and girls, nearer their first flowering, were taken on every raid. Most ended their days upon the Iron Islands as serving girls, whores, household drudges, or wives to other thralls, but the fairest and strongest would be kept as salt wives by their captors. In their marriage customs, as in their god, the Ironborn differ from the mainland of Westeros. Wherever the faith prevails in the Seven Kingdoms, a man joins himself for life to a single wife, and a maid to one husband. On the Iron Islands, however, a man may have only one rock wife, unless she should die, whereupon he may take another, but any number of salt wives. A rock wife must be a freeborn woman of the Iron Islands. Her place is at her man's side in board and bed, and her children come before all others. Salt wives are almost always women and girls captured during raids. The number of salt wives the man can support speaks to his power, wealth, and virility. It must not be thought that salt wives of the Iron Islands are no more than concubines, whores, or bed slaves. Salt marriage, like rock marriage, were customarily performed by priests of the drowned god, albeit in ceremonies considerably less solemn than those that bind a man to his rock wife. Thus, the children of such unions were considered legitimate. Salt sons may even inherit when a man has no true-born sons by his rock wife. Salt marriage has declined notably on the Iron Islands since the conquest, as Aegon the Conqueror made the stealing of women a crime throughout the Seven Kingdoms at the urging of his queen, Rhaenys. The Conqueror also forbade the Reavers to prey upon his own domains. These prohibitions have only been sporadically enforced under his successors, and many Ironborn still yearn to return to what they call the old way.